back in the land.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back, and welcome to the new year of 2025, or as nerds know it as the sum of the first nine cubes.
This is the Daisy Age, Casey.
This is the Daisy Age, which have you learned what that stands for?
I read it and then I promptly forgot.
It's an acronym for the inner sound, y'all. Duh being the D and the A, and if you guessed it or you follow us on social media, we are doing these guys, De La Soul of the Soul. And
That's
they're
got that's got to be a tough record to find, Casey.
we won't get into the record geekdom, but yes, happens. It just so happens I did get it from a local vendor here in town. Thanks, shout out to John of Klutzko. But yeah, 3 Feet Rising, the first De La Soul album released in 1989. And for all you out there in the audience, if you feel like playing along, you can try to find out, answer these questions for us. How many feathers are on a Purdue chicken? How many fibers are in a shredded wheat biscuit? What does tous elle pou mean? And how many times did the Batmobile catch a flat? That's right.
Hey, do you
Boy,
think anyone actually sent in their answers to the address?
I would imagine so. Uh, the thing about De La Soul, and there's a lot of things to say, but I think the starting point is again, I try to do this with my podcast picks. This is essentially three guys. Later it would be four that are out of Amityville, which is in New York, out of just essentially high school buddies, which is a De La word, but we'll go back to that later. So we have three guys here. You know, it's hip hop still kind of in its infancy, but the thing is, in the late 80s, it's changing. And De La represents one of the factions. And the other faction kind of represents more like a harder image, a street image, a gangster rap image. And they definitely parody that. But De La represents a peaceful image and kind of like three guys, three brothers, three friends, three nerds, kind
Nerds.
of like organic kind of geek guys, not kind of the popular guys. But I get the feeling they were pretty popular at Amityville High School.
And they're having a lot of fun with this. This is a goofy record.
Yes. And this also, speaking of goofy humor, might actually be, although there's one kind of unknown before this, might be the birth of the hip hop skit album.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up because, I've heard a lot of skits in my day in 90s albums,
Oh,
rap
yeah.
albums, hip hop albums.
Oh, even in
And
rock.
and as I was listening to this again, because for me it's been a while, that's a whole story of how do you even listen to this album? It's on streaming now, but it sure was not a year or two
Right.
ago, and you couldn't even find it.
It's
Uh,
one of the sample laden ones, is what it is. This era, this golden era before the corporations moved in and went, that 3 seconds is mine, and that 3 seconds is mine. Thanks a lot, Turtles. We'll get back to that.
yeah, and it reminds me a lot of Paul's Boutique, but where I was going with that is it occurred to me, I'm like, was this the first album that included skits?
It's considered essentially like, the real starting point because of how popularized it was. And in fact, since the main one, the intro involves a game show and some silly questions that I might have alluded to, even like Dr. Dre on his infamous, what is it, 91 or 92, The Chronic, it has like one skit where it's parodying the $10 million pyramid. So
Mhm.
yeah, it does. The comedy hip hop combo album is definitely truly accredited to De La as far as it being in the mainstream consciousness. And that's another important word right there I forgot to use. The other thing with De La is they were considered a conscious rap, mindful rap for you youngsters out there.
Yeah,
And that wasn't the other side. That wasn't NWA. that wasn't even Public Enemy, which had came out in 1988 before this, that is very akin to this. Those guys, although conscious and kind of Afrocentric, were still, they're kind of in your face, kind of street, almost not gangster rap, but kind of more Black Power than Afrocentrism. So,
Sure. And it's Nation of Millions, there's humor on that album.
right
Not a lot, but some. But it's a different kind of humor. This
there.
is inside jokes. This is like
Yep.
the kinds of things that if you're in on the joke, you're laughing along with them. But the truth is, I don't mind the skits. A lot of times when I listen to rap albums, I'm like, oh, great, another skit.
Right.
These are amazing and
Yep.
so much variety. I mean, the De La Orgy.
Just when I was going to point out the fact that this is a very PG album, you just start with that skit. But
Hilarious.
yes, yes. I mean, there's so many skits in here that are memorable, and you need a dictionary to understand De La Soul. We didn't start with the founding members, but I didn't understand for the longest time their names or who was even in the band because what happened was these three guys, uh, True Goy the Dove, Podnos, Maceo, I'm gonna get killed here on the internet, were the core group. But Prince Paul, who was a actual DJ at this time, what would be called a producer because of how he worked with them, he came in and took their demo and made it polished and took them to the next level. He kind of was the Dre in that sense. And Prince Paul's a whole nother thing. But De La Soul is these three guys. And actually, the MCs of De La Soul originally are just True Goy and Postnos, or the main guy there. Mace is the original DJ. And if you watch those little videos, Mace is DJing. And that's why, let me loop this all back into terminology. That's why the two main guys are plug one and plug two. They're the two MCs. They're a microphone plug one, microphone plug two, They're making fun of the whole art of MCing, in some sense.
Which, at this point, rap music was not very old.
No, no, not. I mean, really, legitimately, 10 years. They say hip hop started in the Bronx with parties in '75, but we're gonna go with the commercial era. So I would say, '79 to '89, maybe at best, 10 years old. So
Isn't it crazy to think that this was happening in 1989?
well, it really is. When I think that I was 10 years old, it was not on my radar. Um,
No.
I mean, we are probably the only person in this genre of music, this new Afrocentric hip hop that was coming out, would have been like Queen Latifah video or Q-Tip, probably on a Beastie Boys album, but
Yep.
not even really even Tribe, which is definitely the other band, the other hip hop group akin the most to De La Soul. It's
Yep.
Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul.
And both groups sound amazing.
Yes, yes. Q-Tip has that really defined delivery. I mean, you can pick out Q-Tip from anywhere. These guys is not quite so definitive.
Sure.
Post Nose, is like the definitive rapper here, but also True Goy, he's kind of really laid back and so they are definitive in their own way. But
Uh,
Q-Tip, oh my gosh, yeah.
tell me who, okay, who's rapping on Tread Water?
Oh, I mean, what is this? Challenging my notes here?
I'm just saying I'm completely ignorant. I don't know. I know very little about this group, and you
Yeah.
are helping me to learn more about them. Whoever that is, I really enjoy his
It
delivery.
might be Q-Tip. Q-Tip is actually on Buddy.
Yeah, he's on Buddy.
Buddy, buddy, buddy.
So you guys tell us in the comments who know.
I don't have it. I only wrote a few notes on songs, but I remember that one starts off with that weird knocking noise and like it like almost I must have been dozing off while I was taking notes because I made a point of that. But what we really want to get into here, if we're going to start with do we have more on De La? Because I feel like we could go endlessly. I want to know what your experience has been, and I'll just shut up for a while.
No, this is great. You are educating me with this episode here, Casey. I have not been able to dive into it as deeply as I have wanted to. Um,
Okay.
so this is kind of funny. longtime viewers of the podcast will know that I went through the entire Rolling Stone top 500 albums of all time, which
Sure.
this was on the original list. And then they changed the list, and I had to listen to all the new ones that they added, which was great, actually. But at any rate, this was, I think, the only album of the top 500 that I could not listen to in its
Oh
entirety
yeah.
because I had to go to YouTube and I had to go find all these individual tracks. How many are there? 22, 23?
23.
And I had to go try to find all of them on YouTube of all things. They're not all on YouTube, or at least they weren't when I looked. And so I had
Yeah.
to try to piece this thing together. It was a nightmare. So
It,
I'm a little it's almost too easy now that it's
is it safe to say also that that experience soured the listening experience? Because I couldn't help but think it did.
it did. I mean, to me, I've gotten into Tribe Called Quest because of that. Really gotten into their first couple of albums, especially. Really enjoy this period of time in hip hop rap music,
Mhm.
especially this kind of Long Island. I don't know. How would you describe this subgenre? I guess you could say of Tribe Called Quest, and
There's a peaceful, like I said, Afrocentrism movement, and it's definitely Tribe, De La. There was the Jungle Brothers, Native Tongues, even the Roots later, Queen Latifah.
and
You
it's
know,
it's
it,
it's
big move.
fun. You know what I mean? Like I'm not. I have fun when I listen to Public Enemy, but it's a different kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, but this is like you are laughing as much as you are in awe of the skill. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it for me, as I think I dabbled in DJing for a while, just purely as a hobby. And this album, something about the DJing on this one. Now they're actually using a sampling machine, which if you see that, it's pretty hilarious. It's very, it looks kind of analog tape-like, but just some of the stuff they do on this album, like for example, the one that got them in big trouble. Boy, I can't remember. Oh,
Il est midi.
Transmitting,
C'est l'heure
which
de
is track
déjeuner.
8, Transmitting
Qu'est-ce
Live
qu'il y a à
from
manger?
Mars. It's simply a loop of You Showed Me's beginning by the Turtles, which they got sued for. And then simply on the other turntable is just to learn how to speak French. Like that's the kind of stuff I would do as a DJ because it was doable.
Yeah.
You could run that, especially if you could loop the sample. You could run that and it's doable. And that's where kind of like I got to with hip hop, and that's kind of the basics of De La. Now, of course, Prince Paul comes in, they start doing a lot funner stuff, but there's still those building blocks on here.
So like that was the one that got them in trouble with the Turtles.
Of all things,
And aren't the Turtles, aren't they the ones who covered the Judy Sill song?
yes, there's a whole circle here that's now broken, apparently.
Oh man, that's madness.
Yeah,
But
the
then,
Turtles of all people.
and what's crazy is like if you look at because we've talked about like how is this on Spotify now?
Yeah.
Um, but like the song I Know, which is great, of course, has as its artist De La Soul and Otis Redding because they do the whistle from Dock of the Bay.
And yet does not mention Steely Dan, which is the main riff that's being looped off Peg, off of their seminal album Asia. And the Otis Redding, a lot of times in hip hop, you need a clean sample if you're going to put it over a beat or anything. So the
Sure.
Otis Redding is just that whistle exit at the end. So they're just using that because it's clean. There's nothing else going on.
Well, it
And
sounds like it sounds like they're whistling. I don't think it's even a sample of him.
oh, it is. It is. It's Otis Redding. It's at the
Okay.
end of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, which is his posthumous hit.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, they're using that, mostly that, and a little clip of Peg, which involves Donald Fagen going, I know, which of course the song is I Know. So,
Of all Steely Dan's catalog, Peg is up there, man. That's a killer song.
well, De La Soul, Mace, and Prince Paul too, who was the producer, who kind of polished it up. They would just kind of like Paul's Boutique, or to some extent, public. They're just using what's around. I don't even think sometimes there's a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
Like there's a documentary of these guys, and they're just like, well, we're taking what we couldn't get caught. And of course, that's what you would do in '89. Obviously, they don't want to get sued by the stupid Turtles from what I'm sure was a You Showed Me 45, which I believe Buzz saw on the flip. But yeah, I mean, this unfortunately, this also being the golden era would be the end of the golden era.
Right.
That's what's so sad, you know.
Well,
And
and it's like you
come
think
back.
about I don't know, you think about Paul's Boutique sampling the Beatles. I mean, the audacity
Yeah,
to
they got away with murder. The Beastie Boys, I don't know if they're rich white Manhattan Jewish guys, but they got away with murder compared to De La Soul. I mean, people I guess were lowering up, but De La Soul, man, the Turtles, come on, guys.
Well, is it fair to say that, like, I mean, my impression, you tell me if I'm wrong, is that up until this point of like the late 80s, like up until then, it was a lot of James Brown samples. It was a lot of funky drummer loop,
Yes.
like you said, clean samples, but there wasn't a lot of like you wouldn't have thought to bring in Otis Redding and Steely
Right.
Dan and do all that, right?
Right. So there's early samples and loops, which they'd use actually physically, two copies of the record, the merry-go-round created by Grandmaster Flash, which is before there was a looping machine, a button, which we now have on our phones. They would use things like that, just beats, It's hard to be like, oh, that beat is Funky Drummer, and plus Funky Drummer is now considered, I mean, there's been 2,000 uses of that song. So
Yeah.
they
But it's
weren't,
like it's fascinating to me about the art form because
yeah,
again, all creativity is within a box, and
right.
the box of the 80s, they were blowing up the box because it
Yeah.
was this thing where you were so limited in how you could sample just the physical act of it that they were getting really, really, really good and really creative and having fun with it. And
Hmm.
so that's why, like, more than anything else, this reminds me of the spirit of like Paul's Boutique. And that's why everyone loves that album so much.
Hmm.
But then immediately the art form was shut down by the
Yeah.
copyright infringement.
Well, it was shut down because money got involved and companies got involved and it's true. This is the golden era, this is the peak. And because it peaked, because it sold, everyone else came looking for their piece. And
Yeah.
it shut it down and it took it back. And some other people will also say because this was a powerful black movement and it was a peaceful movement, especially De La. De La kind of hated the fact that they were literally called hippie hip hop.
Yeah.
And they're just like, no, we're just, I mean, 3 feet high and rising. I think if they're hippies, it might allude to, cannabis smoking, and that's it, I believe. I don't think they were hippie people.
Yeah.
It just were like, we don't want to fight. We don't want to be violent. We don't want to wear a Dookie chain and an Adidas tracksuit. We want to do something new. Like, this is us. Like, we got goofy, shaved fros. This is who we are.
Well, and I think a lot of that sort of hippie, how people define them that way, from what I understand, it's like, you've got the flowers on the album cover. It's kind of like psychedelic looking. You
Yeah.
got the Daisy Age. I
Yeah.
guess that's kind of the idea. And then they, of course, made De La Soul is Dead, the very next album.
Yeah. They, they loved inside jokes. I think actually, I have this on my notes as one of the last comments, and I think it's a controversial comment. I think one of the main reasons why De La Soul, like, they succeeded, but at the same time, I think it took like 10, 15, 20 years after, is that like when you have an all black hip hop group with a Spanish name, I mean, it's just peculiar. Like, it's like the Ramones. People always say the Ramones failed because they were the Ramones, and people were like, well, we don't want to go see this, Hispanic band.
Well,
It sounds bad and don't take it out of context, but like what I'm saying here is the real black or white of it. If you see De La Soul, I mean, that's Latin words of the soul. It is unusual and it took time. It achieved greatness, but it took time to achieve true greatness, which is, this is in the top five hip hop albums, guaranteed.
yeah. Well, and it took a while to get to people like us. I mean, it was not a thing that we knew about until the age of the internet.
Yep. I'll share one little anecdote here. I actually learned mostly about these guys from my friends from Yosemite that were more into hip hop. Shout out to Jeff Bastard and Cousin Matt and all those guys from Marshall. But they actually took me in 2008 to the second Rock the Bells concert, like festival in George Washington at the Gorge. So I actually got to see De La Soul then,
Oh,
and it
cool.
was it was amazing. And I got to see I got to see Tribe Called Quest. I got to see Nas. I got to see a whole series of famous hip hop acts, and I wasn't quite as ready as I wish I'd been.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually got to see De La Soul when it was all three of them, you know. I don't remember if Prince Paul was actually DJing for him. You know, let's face it, live hip hop, do we really need the production guy? You know, was he doing pressing the button? You know, like there is that element in 2008 for sure. I mean,
Yeah. Right.
there are not hip hop groups out there doing it anymore with two turntables. And in reality, there wasn't very many in like 1982, you
Hmm.
know, because the technology, Wright's law, the exponential degree and the decreasing price of technology, you know, I'm getting out there, but it's very relevant, you know.
Yeah.
Messing around with two turntables is fun, but you know, until you get that mixer with some digital enhancements and buttons and stuff, you are limited to like the first 3 years of hip hop, unless you're really good. And then you can get to this year. You can get to 89 Dela.
I mean, we went pretty quickly from the Chic dum, dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 dum, 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 to this. It happened
Yeah.
very fast.
Yes, it really, really did. And oh my goodness, what else we got some more to say here though. We
Well, let's
really
talk about
do.
the songs.
Yeah, look, here we go. I'll put this track list up here so we can all boggle our minds at that. It looks like at least a double album. So I the other day I tried to even just decipher what was a skit and what was, you know, a song, and I couldn't even do that because some things that feel like a skit are actually a short rap, aka in this world a song, and vice versa. So it's just all pastiche. It's all just goofing around, really. So
It's
much
like you
goofing.
said earlier, it's three guys from the same school having a good time together.
It's so true. Uh, so yeah, let's jump into it really quickly. The other thing I want to say, besides being nerds and hippies and organic and you know this real DIY sense, especially when they first made this, is that I feel that there's a kinship here to punk rock because of that DIY element, and it's pretty affluent in hip hop, really. When you're picking up anything, any kind of instrument, and using it, that especially if you don't know how, that is a very big element of punk rock, you know. And so,
I feel a somewhat of a kinship too with our band a little bit. I mean,
yeah,
it would
high
be
school.
I don't know that I have the right to say that, but I just mean in terms of the spirit of it,
Yes.
a lot of what we were trying to do was inside jokes, things that we would tell our friends and then like, hey, listen to this.
Hmm.
It's that spirit.
It's not just that spirit, but this actual album and the three main guys, excluding Prince Paul, when they actually demoed and made this, like it is that. It is three guys in high school, you know. All they had was pretty cruddy turntables and someone who could do stuff with it and probably a little sampling machine and two mics. That's it, you know.
And they turned it into high art.
They turned it in exactly. They elevated something. And what people would say with hip hop, when people go, "Oh, that's nothing new," you know, go, "Well, hasn't everything been done? Isn't it time that we recycle? You know, we recycle." That's what it's about. Is about recycling. You could listen to someone's song, kind of steal a little bit of it and play it yourself and pretend it's your own, or you could actually just take it and make it your own, you know? And
Yeah.
after that, it is your own, and you put your stamp on it, and it's just a couple snippets, you know.
And
So
why not bring in Schoolhouse Rock while you're at it?
exactly, like track two, the magic number, which of course we remember the Schoolhouse Rocks soundtrack, which had Blind Melon doing three is the magic number. So very akin those two things. I think Dela watched Schoolhouse Rocks, which
Hmm.
I'm sure they did, you know.
Yep. I love this sample and this whole idea. I love how it comes after the game show too, because the questions are like how many and then it's three. It's just perfect.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd thought of that, but you think there's three feathers on a Purdue chicken?
I'm just saying, it's a profound mystery.
Gotcha, gotcha. If we can cut a few forward here, I went over the transmitting live from Mars one. We went over I Know. I guess the one after that that I have on my little list is Potholes in My Lawn because
Yeah.
we've talked about what this samples, and that is super, what would be at the time probably still super obscure, sample of Parliament, of their first album, Osmium, their masterpiece. And it's a Ruth Copeland song, and it's called Little Old Country Boy. So it's
Yep.
what features the yodeling, which they use, and masterfully, might I add, for yodeling and hip hop, it's the top of the shelf. And also the song. And, that is something that, I mean, these guys apparently were is into this Parliament Funkadelic as Steely Dan. So eclectic, you know?
Yeah, love it. So good. Yeah, and this one, it's funny, the production on this one actually reminds me more of Public Enemy than anything else. I know that sounds strange because it's this yodeling song, but it's the looping. I don't know the terminology, but during the verse, it reminds me of like I think it's the Basshead song on uh
Public Enemy,
yeah.
Nation.
Yeah, it's just it's something about the production, how this infectious loop that they create, and it's again 1989. This was happening.
Yeah, yeah. And I've referenced Prince Paul a few times without giving him any background, but for me, my favorite thing about De La right here is Prince Paul because I'm a Prince Paul guy. This guy was, a real producer, and he would have a serious career after this and still does. And of course was on I think some of De La too, but they were on a Gorillaz hit, Feel Good Inc., which was
Yeah.
massive, 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 massive hit. And also he did Handsome Boy Modeling School, which had a couple huge hits with Dan the Automator, who also was a huge, huge, huge producer. So yeah, Prince Paul, big name. He goes by producer because it's almost silly to be called a DJ at this point, but he's doing the production. He revamped this album and really made it something because he heard about him, heard the demo, and was like, "This is it."
Yeah.
So Prince Paul's the overarching wizard. He's the I don't know. I don't want to call him Phil Spector, but he's the man behind the curtain of De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. And I do believe without Prince Paul, this album would have not reached as much of the masses as it did. So I don't want to sell him short, especially since he's my favorite piece.
Sure. It does make you wonder how many of these just inspired ideas, you want to be a fly on the wall as they were coming up with this stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. And also, what if this was just a demo tape that never made it out of Amityville High?
Yeah.
Because it could have.
Uh-huh.
But anywho, getting back to the songs here, this is going to be fun because the next one, the main one, broke into top 40 actually. Me, Myself, and I, the album title track. Again, Knee Deep is a sample, the main riff off of the Funkadelic album Uncle Jam Wants You. So, and a slight bit from Funky Worm by the Ohio Players. But again, we have Parliament Funkadelic as the main source here.
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, George Clinton probably didn't sue anybody, and I don't think he had any money in '89. So,
Yeah, I feel like when we talked about Funkadelic, I remember like kind of getting a sense from Clinton that he was thrilled that this was happening, right?
yeah. Well, yeah, it started here, but also West Coast gangster rap, heavily, heavily sampled. And they did ultimately kind of like turn around and kind of pay tribute to and pay money
Yeah.
toward Clinton. And I'm sure it's part of the reason why he's where he's at now. There was a couple albums, tons of guest spots. So yeah, I mean, they did share. So
Yeah.
and George Clinton was one of those guys that he saw that as a plus because publicity is publicity.
Well, yeah, and it's evolution of the music.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he himself, I mean, even that song Atomic Dog that Snoop Dogg notoriously used for What's My Name. I mean, it's really on the nose. It is a real true kind of ripoff in my opinion. They're both great, but what George Clinton was already doing is what Snoop did, without it's like a direct influence.
Yeah.
Direct.
I
So
mean,
he
we would all like to
yeah.
think we would all like to think that we would be that generous and like recognizing that there's something this next generation is going to take it in a new way, and that's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole different debate. I certainly hope so. I mean, we all got good computers now. People always reference Jay Dilla as one of the last great DJ producers, and he was working with the smallest clips and loops,
Yeah.
in
And it
minute.
all and it all comes down to inspiration too, like every generation has their box or whatever the form is, and so what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. I think we could be, it could be a new renaissance. Let's hope so. It's 2025. Lots going on already. I just got one more song to mention. I kind of tried to go over the big ones here, and this one was actually earlier in the playlist, but Say No Go, which is very, very apparently, I can't go for that. No Can Do by Hall & Oates. Say No Go, I can't go for that. No Can Do in parentheses. So a little jab there or something, a little silliness from that track. But when you hear it, you hear it. The samples on this album are big samples and they're recognizable to
Yeah.
music fans. And I think that's what got them in trouble. That and the Turtles.
For
I mean,
decades.
yeah, there's a Benny King one. I don't have all the samples on here, but let's go over a couple of my favorite skits really quick. I want to go to Can You Keep a Secret, track 5, which references God, what is the refrain in that one? I don't even have it written, but they go through things that you need to get rid of, or no, take it off, maybe.
Take it
No,
off.
no, that's the track, Take It Off. So that's I'm going to list what De La Soul in 1989 thinks you need to take off. You need to take off that suede front, take off those contacts, take off horse meat, take off shell toes, take off track fleas, take off your do-rag, take off your mock neck, take off your fat laces, take off your can't read my Balmer, BBD, Concourse, Gazelles, Kangol, Jordache, Afro, Jerry Curl, Le Tigre. Take it off.
And see, why did I miss why? Meanwhile, I'm sitting here listening to MC Hammer and I'm completely missing out on all this.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that's a good point in time comparison. Well, being in Northern California, we'll just blame it on that.
I was listening to MC Hammer and CNC Music Factory, Casey.
That's all that it's, these guys are on the East Coast, that not it's not leaking in over here, it's not leaking in over
No, it was not.
No, 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 no.
Hilarious.
Yeah, the other one I was trying to do was the Can You Keep Secret one where they go through Buddy and Haircut and Take a Ludin. They just go through everyone's names, like posting this, Take a Ludin, and then like you got Dandruff, and then it just the whole thing on the beat. It reminds me so much of the Beastie Boys' first foray into hip hop, which is Cookie Puss. It's so amateurish, and you can't help but think it's one of the first things they made.
I
Uh,
love that. I love that there's those three groups all cross paths and seem to genuinely like each other. That Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, and Beastie Boys. They're all New York. They're all, and they just seem to have a similar way of looking at the world and lots of humor. Man, that's welcome. It's hard to find music with humor in it.
Yeah, and it's a really poignant point because after this, like we talked about, after this, what would the Beastie Boys do?
Back to punk.
Yeah, and the return to their instruments, right?
Yeah.
The weird thing is, hip hop did, and it had to. It had to. There was no more of this, let's just take these little clips anymore.
Yeah.
So it went back to, you know, ground zero, and it really did, even in this movement too. When you think of the next wave of this movement, the Fugees and all that, they're using bands, they're using instruments, they're showing what is real talent that if they were using hip hop stuff, a lot of people wouldn't think there's talent there, even though there is.
You might say this is the peak of the pastiche.
It is. This album, I've been listening to this album so much over the past week. I can't believe I flubbed that intro, but I knew I would anywho. But it is an album you can return to. It is humorous, it is light, it is organic, it is super appealing, and it appeals to me, and I'm glad it appeals to you now on a very special level of creating music in high school and being in bands because That is what this is, plain and simple.
I think for me, I'm gonna still put Low End Theory above it, but I really, really, really love it, and I need to give it even more time because, like I say, I haven't had enough time to devote to it that I want to. But of all this kind of like late '80s, well, and of course, Public Enemy, I don't know. There's just so many classics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I don't know the Rolling Stones official. I think this is 103, but is it the second hip hop album on there? Is it the third? Is it the fifth? I don't know, but it goes in the top five in
I
my
would
book.
agree with that. I would agree with that.
So hopefully we've made some fans out here of De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. It's a masterful album and it's just fun. It's just fun, you know. If you hate this album, I mean you don't got no soul, man. Take it off. Take a Ludin, man. You got dandruff, you know?
Yeah, if you don't like this album, you have dandruff.
That's right.
And
That's
you know what? If you do like this album, you have dandruff.
that's also true. Yes. So that's I mean they do that shout out one on this where it's like do as Dela does. I wish I could do it, but it's like take that's what I was doing. We were doing that one the take a Ludin and they're like, if you want to see something, if you like something soda, let me hear you say Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola. You know, that's the spirit of this album. And it there's one other really big point that made me want to say, which is that hip hop, when it came out, they thought they couldn't recreate it on record. They thought they couldn't capture it because it was a street party. And I would make a strong argument that it took 10 years, but this album really does have strong elements of that, more so than like a Public Enemy or something.
Yeah,
Even how produced this is. It does give the feeling through these skits and through these little bits and through these shout outs and things. It gives the feel of what it was like in 75 in the Bronx, you know,
that's cool.
which
That's a
is
good
so
point.
cool.
Yeah.
So cool. Because hip hop is organic and you cannot really quite do the same thing in recorded music. But, you know, they did a really good job here. And that's my final point because I've made too many.
Good point.
So, uh, I guess I should speak here too for the hardcore here. I actually bumped this one because we were supposed to do Judy Sill, and I, I can't wait to do that album. And I'm pretty sure actually we might be doing it next. Is that so?
That is correct. Next up, we have the one and only Judy Sill's second album, Heart Food. If you saw our last episode, Casey already introduced it. But this is fitting because you introduced me to Judy Sill. So it's only fitting that I would be the one to graciously inherit this pick because she is an artist, and this is an album that has become very special to me through you, and I'm very thankful for that. Uh, just something about Judy Sill, Casey. Something about Judy
Oh
Sill.
yes. We're gonna get back into it. I'm sorry I bumped her. You know, it's just a little down the road. It's gonna be the first podcast where we actually have a repeat artist. So it is going to be. I actually watched our episode today and it was really good. And, you know, we have that background now on her. So this is going to be, I guess, a comparison, a discussion of the end of her career. And that's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I pushed it because I think it's going to be a different episode. So we shouldn't give too much away. It will be an album review. And yeah,
Yeah, if the first Judy Sill self-titled was her introduction to the world, Heart Food is, man, how do you describe it? It's an artistic statement, but it's almost tinged with the knowledge that she's not finding the success,
yeah,
right? It's a bittersweet listen.
it's kind of right here on the cover a little bit. And
Yep.
then, but look at here's you open it up and you really get I feel bad even doing this. You really get the real Judy Sill at work here. And
Yep.
this booklet, it's just a heart and then it's the lyrics. Amazing. I'm very privileged to own this. And I did find it in the wild too. Thank you. Shout out to the Down Home Music in El Cerrito. I almost said El Centro. El Cerrito. And the vendor for helping me find this. So
Well, we'll
can't
get into it next time. I hope you'll take a listen to De La Soul and then take a listen to Heart Food so we can talk about it. And Casey, enjoyed this one.
And don't forget, take a Luden. which is a cough drop, I think.
Thanks for the reminder.